Welcome to this effort, which is a collaboration between Bedford Museum and Brush Creek Mill, to talk about the fishery, fishing, boats, all those kinds of related things here around this local area. What is the most vivid thing that comes to mind when you think about that fishing experience that you've had?
You think about that as a boy in the pond net boat with that cabin on the rear. We had been down in Thunder Bay lifting, and my dad, one of his hired hands, was a guy by the name of Bill Lidke. And coming around North Point and heading back towards our harbor, the rear wind really came out of the north, bucking right into it. And we got about halfway back, and there was, inside the cabin was a pitcher pump, and my job was to keep pumping, keep the water out that we were taking on in the boat. And Bill Lidke said to me, my nickname was Bud. He said, "Buddy, wouldn't you like a little path to shore?" About that wide. I said, "I sure would."
That'd be nice.
Well, as a child, you have great impressions that come in, and those are the memories that I see. I would go down to the fish dock and wait for the boat to come in, and of course, here I'm a young shaver, and so my father said, "Don't go down to the fish dock until you know how to swim." Well, I could swim underwater, but I couldn't swim on top that well. And so I was down there, and the boat was in, and they were working on the dock, and the next thing I knew, I was grabbed by the seat of my pants and thrown into the water. And then my father had a pike pole, and he picked me up and brought me back. And he says, "I told you not to come down here," But that was the lesson that I remember, and learning how not to mind my parents.
Just being out there, I mean, it gets into your blood, and it's just something you want to do. I mean, I have seen people come down and they wanted to be commercial fishermen, and they got seasick, and after you get seasick 2 or 3 times, ends your career,
Yeah.
And if you learned how to handle that, it was just an enjoyable experience of being out on the lake and seeing the change.
I was probably about 12 years old, and my dad took me down to the dock to look at the fish tug Tramp. The Tramp had, the night before, had hit a steamboat and cracked open the bow, and I went down and looked at it, and I think it was wide enough I could have walked through the bow. What had happened is that they had lifted lake trout. It was a long run. They were out probably 3-4 hours out of Alpena. And after they had all their work done, they were coming home. The crew was sleeping except for the guy that was steering. He fell asleep, and he hit the steamboat, and the steamboat stopped, luckily. They dropped a canvas sling over the bow and lifted them up a little bit, and they brought them in as far as Thunder Bay Island. And in the meantime, they had taken everything that weighed anything at all and put it in the back of the boat to lift the bow up out of the water. And from Thunder Bay Island into Alpena, they had to come by themselves, except for the Coast Guard had a small boat that ran alongside them. So, yeah, it was probably pretty scary for them. I think it started with my father, who started fishing out of Manistee, Michigan. At about the age of 12, he bought himself a rowboat and a box of nets, and he fished for perch out of Manistee, and he would go around to the bars and sell his catch to make himself a little money.
And then how did it work its way down into Alpena with
Alpena.
a bigger tug?
Okay, he brought a tug from, I don't know who, somebody in Manistee wanted to come to Alpena and fish out of Alpena. So my dad brought the boat around with his best friend, Tony Hansen, who they were together all their lives out of Alpena.
What was the name of the first tug that your father fished and brought to Alpena?
I have no idea.
No
I
idea.
don't know that.
So what is the tug that you fished on? And when did you start fishing with your dad?
Well, the first time I went out on the lake with him, I was probably about 8 years old.
Oh my goodness.
And it was a boat that was owned by Walter Scott. It was called the Scotty. It was a wooden boat. And as I recall, they were fishing trout. And of course, my first trip out, I got seasick, so I spent the most day in the bunk.
I was just going to ask, what does an 8-year-old do on a fish tug? Get sick.
Get sick.
Get sick.
We were out one time and with a heavy load of fish coming back from Canada. And I remember I was down and I was sick in the engine room there by the engine. And my father came down, he says, "Come on, I want to show you something." And I said, "I don't feel like going anyplace." He says, "Come on, I want to show you something." So he took me up into the pilot house. And I was surprised because the boat was going up and down naturally in the storm, but what would happen, it's loaded heavy now. All the portholes and doors and everything are closed. And when the boat would come up and take a dive into the water would come right over the boat and you'd be looking through the porthole and you were underwater. You could see the water bubbling around. It was just like a submarine almost. And then the boat would gradually come up and then take another dive again. Well, that was exciting, but
Didn't make you feel
when
any
I was
better.
sick, I wasn't that interested.
The DNR ran 2 patrol boats, I remember. Every now and then they would show up when you were out lifting and check your water depth, make sure you weren't over 80 feet and things like that. And the DNR officer quite often would show up when we came in with it to the dock to check to make sure you didn't have any illegal fish. And I can remember this Bill Lidke again. He was coming off the boat carrying his lunch bucket, and the officer's name was Bill Connors. And he said, "Bill, could I look in your lunch box?" And Bill looked at him and said, "Well, Mr. Connors, I didn't know you were a food inspector."
Again as a young boy. And I didn't go out with my father very much because I would get seasick. And it would be miserable. And the reason I got seasick basically because I had a weak stomach. And what happened when you start a diesel engine, it isn't you check a starter and away it goes like we have like in a car. No, you had to heat. It was a 3-cylinder Kellenberg engine, and you had to heat. There was like a pin, and they had torches on it, and they would heat that pin red hot, and that would heat the cylinder. And then when those pins were red hot, they'd put a compression onto the engine, and it would start and ignite. But in heating those, the torches were heat with fuel oil, and the whole boat was just blue with fumes. And I was sick before the boat even started off the shore.